My name is Amir Al-Harazi, and if you are hearing my voice today, it is because God interrupted an execution so that I could tell the truth. I was born a prince in Saudi Arabia, surrounded by luxury, guards, and rules that controlled every step I took. But inside, I lived like a prisoner. Nothing made sense, until the night when a simple click changed everything. Alone in my palace room, I accidentally found a video by Charlie Kirk, and for the first time I heard someone speak about freedom, faith, and truth with courage. That opened a wound and a path. That path led me to persecution, to being abandoned by my family, to prison, and to a death sentence. And in the exact second when the sword was about to touch my neck, heaven rose on my behalf. I am alive because God rescued me, and today I am going to tell you everything. And to begin, check if you are already subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to move you. I was born inside a world that many would call paradise, but to me it always carried the silent smell of a golden prison. My name is Amir Al-Harazi. I am 34 years old, and I am the third son of a distant cousin of the king of Saudi Arabia. From the very first day of my life, destiny was not a choice. It was a decree. Everything around me shone with wealth. The polished marble floor that reflected the sun like a mirror. The fountains that poured cold water even when the desert burned at 40 degrees. The long hallways, the heavy doors, the armed guards who looked like part of the house's decoration. In every corner there was someone serving, someone watching, someone waiting for orders. Hundreds of people lived there, dedicated to maintaining a system that moved like a perfect machine. Yet inside that perfection, I always felt something failing. Since I was 4 years old, religion was the foundation of everything. I woke up before sunrise to recite verses from the Quran under the watchful eye of a tutor who never showed fatigue. My education was rigorous, shaped as if every word could define the future of our lineage. My father, Prince Rashid, was an imposing man, serious, disciplined, and absolute devotee of Sharia. He believed that the value of a son was directly tied to his obedience, and that made every gesture of mine observed, every sentence analyzed, every doubt corrected before it even had the chance to be born. My mother, Samira, was the only soft breath in that castle. She touched my face as if trying to calm something she always sensed inside me. Maybe she saw before everyone else that I never fit there in the way they expected. She was sensitive, kind, but even she knew that nothing inside the royal family could go against the rules imposed. Her love existed in the details, in the warm tea left by my bed, in the way she adjusted my collar before ceremonies, in the look that said she wanted to protect me, even knowing she could not. I had private teachers for everything: languages, history, international politics, government etiquette, public behavior, self-defense, and of course, the strictest possible interpretation of Islam. The expectation was clear from early on. I would serve the state, honor my family's name, and never ask any question that challenged centuries of tradition. My life had been written and signed before I even learned to write my own name. But inside, something bothered me. It was not rebellion, not ingratitude, not contempt for my family or for our faith. It was simply an emptiness, a persistent feeling that I was living as a piece in a game I was not allowed to understand. It was as if all that gold had weight, not value. I grew up surrounded by everything anyone outside would dream of having. And yet I felt like someone looking through a window, wishing to touch a freedom I did not even know how to describe. When I entered adolescence, that feeling grew stronger. Every step of mine was watched, every conversation monitored. Nothing could be questioned. Doubt was considered weakness. Curiosity was seen as threat. The religious leaders who constantly came to the palace were men who seemed to carry more fear than faith. They spoke of punishment, discipline, obedience, rules, but rarely spoke of peace or love. I listened silently, but inside I began to wonder if God truly wanted faith to be lived as such a heavy burden. I began to realize something was wrong when I noticed what I was never supposed to notice: that inside the palace, people obeyed more out of fear of doing wrong than out of desire to do right. Religion blended with politics, politics blended with power, and power blended with control. And I, a teenager living in that world, began to feel a deep desire to understand what existed outside those walls. I wanted to learn about other cultures, to know how other people lived, how other families raised their children, how other nations found purpose. But that desire was dangerous, and I knew it. The feeling of forced destiny became clearer each day. They had already decided whom I would marry, what function I would have in the government, how I should behave in public, what opinions I should hold. I barely knew who I was, but the world already knew who I should be. And the clearer that became, the more restless I felt inside. Then, when I was 22 years old, my father announced, with the coldness of someone reading a report, that I would be sent to study international relations at George Washington University in the United States. The justification was political, not personal. He wanted me to return prepared to deal with Western diplomats, but without ever absorbing their culture. To him, I should observe the world, but not be part of it. But what he did not know, and could never imagine, is that that trip would be the beginning of everything that would change my life. When I stepped into Washington for the first time, I felt something different in the air. It was not just the climate, it was the atmosphere. People spoke openly, laughed loudly, walked as if they had the right to their own lives. For the first time, no one called me Your Highness. No one bowed. No one looked away. They treated me like a regular student. And instead of offending me, that set something free inside me. I cooked my own meals, did my own laundry, got lost on the subway, and, for the first time, I discovered the feeling of simply being someone, a normal human being. Without positions, without titles, I made friends, something that, even with so many people around me in the palace, I had never truly experienced. And many of them were Christians. Not Christians who wanted to discuss religion. Not Christians who tried to convert me, but Christians who lived a faith that felt light. I saw kindness. I saw joy. I saw something I had never seen before. Freedom within faith. They treated me kindly, invited me to talk, shared food, laughed with me. And I was impressed by the fact that they weren't afraid of anything. Their faith didn't seem built on fear, but on conviction, love, and hope. That stayed with me, like an image I couldn't forget. I returned to Saudi Arabia 4 years later, graduated, experienced, more mature, and completely transformed inside, though no one noticed. The palace was the same, the walls were the same, the routine was the same, but I was no longer the same. And I felt the weight of tradition falling on my shoulders again, this time heavier than ever. It was on one of those nights shortly after I returned that everything truly began. I was in my room, trying to practice English to maintain what I had learned in the United States. I opened my laptop, put on my headphones, and started searching for random videos, as I always did. And that's when the algorithm, something so simple, became the most unlikely instrument God could use to reach someone like me. Between one video and another, a clip from a lecture by Name appeared. Charlie Kirk. The title didn't grab my attention, but something inside me told me to click. I thought it was just curiosity. Today I know it wasn't. It was direction. When I pressed play, I felt like I was listening to something forbidden. Charlie spoke about freedom, faith, America, truth, responsibility, religious persecution, Christianity, and the purpose of life. He quoted biblical principles with courage, clarity, and confidence. He spoke about God as if God were alive, truly alive, near, present, accessible. He spoke about the Christian faith in a way that didn't seem political but personal, and that affected me in a way I can't explain. I lowered the volume, placed the laptop near the door, checked to see if anyone was coming, and continued watching. I felt fear, but I also felt something I hadn't felt since leaving the United States, peace, mixed with curiosity. Something inside me began to awaken. Then, suddenly, Charlie quoted John chapter 1, and that kept nagging at me. John chapter 1. John chapter 1. When the video ended, I typed in a hurry. John chapter 1, full text. The words appeared on the screen, and as I read, something inside me seemed to open a door I didn't even know existed. It was as if those ancient phrases pierced the air of my room and touched a place inside me that no one had ever touched before. I read each line trembling inside, not understanding everything but feeling everything. And it was in that silent dawn, with the sleeping desert outside and the soft glow of the screen illuminating my face, that my life began to change, not by the hand of a man, not by the voice of a teacher, but by the unexpected impact of a truth that found its way to me through the most unlikely door in the world, the internet. And that was just the beginning, because I had no idea what that would awaken within me, and how it would completely consume everything I thought I knew. When I finished reading John chapter 1 that morning, something awakened within me. It was as if I had opened a door that had always existed inside my chest, but that I had never had the courage to touch. That text moved me so much that, in the following days, I couldn't think of anything else. I mentally repeated phrases I had never heard before, ideas about light, about life, about someone who came into the world not to condemn, but to save. It was completely different from everything I had been taught, but at the same time it seemed true, alive, real. That's when I decided to send a message to David Ajani, the Christian friend I had met in the United States. I didn't say anything directly because I knew any conversation could put us both at risk. I wrote something simple, almost neutral, a question about an ancient text I had found. He understood immediately. That same day, he sent me a digital copy of it, Gospel of John in English. He only said, "Read slowly, and let the words speak to you." I waited for night to fall. I waited for everyone to fall asleep. I walked down the hallway like someone carrying a terrible sin simply by existing. I locked my bedroom door. I turned off the lights. I lay down on the cold marble floor with my laptop resting on my lap and opened the file. I wasn't prepared for what happened inside me. Each sentence seemed to tear apart something I'd carried since childhood. I read about forgiveness and my chest burned because I had never known true forgiveness. I read about love and my mind struggled, because I had learned about law, obedience, and duty, but never about love that gives itself without demanding anything in return. And when I read about God as Father who knows the heart, who calls by name, who draws near to the broken, I couldn't hold back the tears. I cried in a way I didn't remember was possible. It wasn't physical pain. It wasn't sadness. It was as if years of fear, repression, silence, and guilt were melting away inside me. As if I were finding something my spirit had been searching for since childhood, even without knowing it. I compared each word with everything I had been taught, and a terrible reality appeared before me. I realized I had spent my whole life trying not to make mistakes, while God was offering me something completely different. The faith I knew was built on fear. The faith I was reading was built on love. It was like standing before two worlds, one based on punishment, the other on forgiveness, and realizing for the first time which one truly called to me. In that absolute silence, I realized I could no longer hold it inside. I closed my eyes and, for the first time, without ritual, without fear, without rehearsed words, without demands, I simply spoke. The true God reveals who you are. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know what to expect. But at that moment, something calmed down inside me. I felt such a deep, real peace that even my body felt lighter. I thought, if this is only the beginning, I need to keep going. And I did. Day after dawn. I read in secret, taking a deep breath every time someone passed in the hallway. But I needed it. This was my life. The months went by, and the gospel became my secret refuge. The more I read, the more I understood. The more I understood, the more something inside me changed. It wasn't a single moment, it was a process, slow, profound, transformative. It was as if the words were dismantling, piece by piece, everything I believed defined me. Till one day, after weeks of fighting what I felt, I realized I couldn't run away anymore. It was dawn. The entire palace was silent, and I felt something so strong that it made me fall to my knees. I didn't have a prepared speech. I didn't have a perfect prayer. I just said what my heart screamed, "Jesus, if you are the Son of God, and guide me." When I said that, something inside me finally let go. I felt as if an invisible chain had broken. I realized that I had spent my whole life searching for a distant God, when in fact he had always been near. And in that instant I surrendered completely, even knowing that it could cost me everything, including my life. And that's exactly what started to happen. The first evidence of my change wasn't theological or emotional, it was practical. I started treating the people inside the palace differently, especially the servants and guards. I began greeting them by name, something that had never been done before. I started asking about their families. I began to see them as human beings, not as cogs in the machine. That caught people's attention. And it caught the attention of the wrong person. One of the oldest servants, Hassan, a man in his 40s, father of 3, always discreet, always present, began to observe me more closely. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say anything, but I could see in his eyes a mixture of surprise and concern. I tried to act naturally, but the truth is my heart was burning, and it showed even in the way I walked. It was one early morning, while I was rereading the Gospel of John, that it all happened. I was so engrossed in the text that I didn't hear the door open. I only realized it when I heard a soft noise behind me. When I looked up, Hassan was standing in the doorway, motionless, staring intently at the glow of my laptop screen, where the text was open. His face immediately paled. He brought his hand to his mouth as if he had seen something terrible. He closed the door slowly, approached, and said, his voice trembling, "Prince Amir, please, stop. For the love of your life, stop." I tried to talk, I tried to explain myself, but he was desperate. He held my shoulders almost in tears, saying that file, that text, it could destroy us. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. He knew what it meant. He knew the laws better than anyone. I could have promised to stop, I could have lied, I could have tried to reassure him. But I couldn't deny what I felt. And in that instant, Hassan realized it. He saw in my face that it wasn't curiosity, it wasn't a distraction, it wasn't a phase. It was a decision. And that destroyed him. The next day, he couldn't keep the secret. Out of fear, out of desperation, out of survival instinct, he reported everything to my father. I didn't know at the time. I only heard heavy footsteps in the hallway, gruff voices, doors slamming shut. Suddenly my bedroom door burst open. Guards rushed in, grabbed my arms, and dragged me out before I could even understand what was happening. They didn't explain anything. They just led me through the dark corridors of the palace, downstairs I'd never seen before, to a room I never knew existed. And there he was. My father. Prince Rashid, the man whose gaze always carried authority, but who on that day carried something much deeper. Pain. He yelled, asking if it was true. He yelled, asking if I had betrayed our family's faith. He asked if I had allowed forbidden ideas into my heart. And I couldn't lie. I didn't want to lie. I said, with tears streaming down my face, I found the truth. I found peace. He closed his eyes as if he'd been stabbed. Then he opened them again, filled with something I'd never seen before. A mixture of anger, fear, and despair. And then he said the phrase that echoes in my mind to this day. Then you are no longer my son. I didn't have time to respond. I was thrown into a dark, cold, damp cell. Days passed without me knowing if it was day or night. I saw no one. I only heard footsteps, doors, and sometimes distant voices discussing me. At one point, religious leaders came to the cell. They demanded that I deny everything, that I renounce, that I declare repentance. They tried to convince me, they tried to intimidate me, they tried to break me. But I couldn't. Something inside me was firm, not out of courage, but out of conviction. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I was only afraid of denying the one who had finally given me peace. When they realized I wasn't going to give in, the verdict was declared. Public execution. The day arrived sooner than I expected. I was led to the central square, a place known for what happened there, but one I never thought I'd see up close. The ground was hot, the air dry, and a crowd gathered as if it were just part of the routine. The executioner was ready, his sword gleaming in the sun. I was chained, but my heart wasn't. The imam shouted, demanding that I repent. His voice echoed throughout the entire square. I felt the gaze of hundreds of people upon me. And at that moment, without thinking, I replied, I cannot deny the truth. And then, the impossible happened. The sky suddenly darkened. A strong wind kicked up dust from the ground. In a few seconds, a sandstorm, violent, dense, completely unexpected, engulfed the square like a living wall. People began to scream. Guards tried to protect themselves. The executioner fell to the ground. The sand got into everything. blinding, burning. And in the midst of that absolute chaos, I heard a voice. "My son, get up and run away." That's where everything changed. And that's exactly where I'm going to continue from. In the next part. When I heard that voice in the midst of the storm, that phrase so clear, so intimate, so impossible to ignore, my whole body moved before my mind could even comprehend what was happening. I simply stood up, even with the broken chain still fastened to my wrists, and began to run. It wasn't a logical run, it wasn't a planned run. It was as if my feet knew where to go long before I did. The wind whipped against my face so hard I could barely open my eyes. But somehow I could see the path through the narrow alleys surrounding the square. Every movement seemed guided. Every turn seemed calculated. It was as if that storm was making way for me to pass, pushing me away from the place where I should have died. I ran without looking back, without breathing properly, without thinking of anything other than the profound feeling that I needed to get out of there while there was still time. The streets were chaotic. People were shouting. Doors were banging. Dust was getting everywhere. And yet there was an invisible clearing ahead of me. At times the wind changed direction as if it were blocking the guard's path, and I felt, with a strange certainty, that this was no coincidence. This was protection. When I finally left the city behind, the silence was so intense that my ears ached. The storm was still raging inside, but outside the air was still, heavy, and hot. I no longer had the strength to think strategically. I only knew that I needed to get as far away from the urban center as possible and into the desert, where I couldn't be found so easily. The problem is that the desert doesn't forgive anyone, and I had no water, no food, no compass, no plan whatsoever. I only had hope. But hope, however powerful, doesn't hydrate the human body. After walking for hours, the heat began to make everything spin around me. My heart was racing. My mouth was so dry it hurt. My feet felt like they were laden with stones. I looked at the horizon and saw only sand, more sand, and a trembling line on the horizon, as if the world were about to collapse. It was there, at that point where I could no longer distinguish between mirage and reality, that I saw a reflection, a small glimmer. At first I thought it was just sunlight playing tricks on my weary mind. But as I continued walking, I realized it was more than that. The glimmer grew larger. The light seemed steady. And then I saw water. One oasis real. I wasn't sure if it was true until I heard the sound. The gentle sound of water moving in the wind. I fell to my knees. I crawled. And when my hands touched the surface of the cold water, I felt as if my whole body had awakened from a coma. I drank without thinking. I took a deep breath. I washed my face. And there, in that blessed silence, I cried for a few seconds because I knew it wasn't normal to find an oasis so close to the escape route. Not at that time. But God was guiding me. While I was resting, I heard light footsteps. For a second I thought they were soldiers, but when I looked up, I saw two men dressed as Bedouins. They had attentive but kind eyes. They didn't seem threatened. On the contrary, it seemed as if they were expecting me. They didn't ask who I was. They didn't ask for explanations. They just helped me up and said simply that I could rest there. They gave me fresh water, dates, bread. They stayed with me, 2 days without haste, without interrogation, without fear. When I finally managed to speak, I simply told them I was fleeing. They didn't ask from what. And when I realized it was time to go, they showed me a safe path that would lead me towards the border with Jordan. I walked for hours, sometimes stumbling, other times almost fainting. It was as if my body was functioning only on the memory of survival. The sun burned, but I knew that after everything God had already done up to that point, He wouldn't let me die in the desert. When I finally reached the border, my whole body felt like it was about to collapse. I didn't even have the strength to celebrate. I just kept walking, guided more by faith than by logic. When I arrived at the edge of the Jordan River, the sun was setting, painting the sky a dark orange, and I barely noticed the two men standing there, watching me as if they were certain I would appear. They didn't seem scared. They didn't seem lost. They seemed prepared. I tried to ask what they were doing there, but before I could say anything, one of them, a man with dark skin and a short beard, stepped forward and said, "God sent us here today." His name is Amir. Come with us." I didn't have the strength to question anything. I only knew that I was alive by a miracle and that anyone who could say my name like that, without ever having seen me before, without having received any news, could only be telling the truth. They took me to a simple house hidden in the middle of a small village. When we entered, I immediately felt something I hadn't felt since those early mornings reading the gospel. Peace. The peace didn't come from the walls, nor the furniture, nor the food on the table. It came from the people inside. They were men and women who had already lived through stories like mine, all former Muslims, all transformed, all aware of the burden they carried and the freedom they had found. They treated me like family. They gave me water, food, clean clothes. They let me sleep in a small but warm bed. And that night, as I lay there, I felt a safety I had never felt in the palace. Because there, no one saw me as a prince, nor as a fugitive. They saw me as someone God had found. The next day I was introduced to Pastor Adil. I met a lean Egyptian man with a firm expression but kind eyes. He looked at me as if he already knew my whole story without me saying a word. We talked for hours. He explained the Bible to me with a simplicity that transcended any barrier. He spoke of Jesus as someone alive, present, intimate. And for the first time, I felt I was in the presence of someone who understood exactly the transformation that was happening within me. He was the one who said it was time to take the next step. Before sunrise, we walked together to the Jordan River. The water was cold, calm, shimmering in the soft dawn light. I stood on the bank for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to understand everything I had experienced up to that point. I was no longer the man who had grown up in the palace. I was no longer the prince molded by tradition. I was someone who had been found by God in the midst of a storm. When I entered the water, I felt something different, as if it were the first time my body and soul were walking in the same direction. The pastor put his hand on my shoulder and asked if I was ready. And I said, "The prince died on the sands of Arabia. Today a servant of Christ is born." And then I was baptized. That water wasn't just water, it was rebirth. I left there with a light heart, a clear mind, and the certainty that my life had just begun. The following months were intense. I lived in Jordan 2 years, studying the Bible every day, learning, relearning, letting God rebuild my identity from scratch. I studied stories of persecution, understood how secret Christian networks in the Middle East worked, learned to disciple those who had found faith under threat. Each day was a new learning experience. I became stronger inside, more steadfast, more aware that I now had a purpose. And gradually I began traveling with a small group. We would discreetly go to house churches in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. We found families in hiding, curious young people, men and women who wanted to know more about Jesus. I saw tears, I saw hope, I saw transformation. I saw people risking everything for something the world can't explain. And however dangerous it was, I felt joy. A joy so intense that my heart felt like it would burst whenever someone said they had found peace through faith. That's when people started calling me Brother Amir, the prince who was saved by the storm. I never asked for that name. I never sought recognition. But I accepted the nickname because, in a way, it reminded me that I was only alive because of that miracle. That moment when God decided that my story wasn't over yet. Over time, I began to understand things that previously seemed impossible to comprehend. The greatest of these was the true meaning of loving those who hurt us. At first, I struggled with this. How can you love someone who destroyed your life? How can you forgive someone who handed you over to such a harsh sentence? But the more I grew in faith, the more I understood what Jesus meant by this. That's how one day, during a silent prayer, I found myself saying, "God, I forgive Hassan." And on that day, a heavy part inside me finally fell away. I pray every day for my family, for my people, for those who still live locked in fear, just as I lived for so many years. I know I can't go back. I know my face is still on watch lists. I live in hiding, yes, but I live free, because true freedom isn't found in where you live. It's found in the truth you carry within you. And today I can say, with the deepest conviction in the world, I lost a throne on earth, but I gained an eternal kingdom. and no golden crown can ever compare to the crown of light that Christ places upon those who find him. And if you are still here with me, listening to my voice until this very last minute, I want to thank you, because telling this story is never simple. Each memory still carries the weight of what I lost, but also the brilliance of what God gave me. Today I live in hiding, but I live free. I no longer carry titles, jewels, or bodyguards. I carry only one certainty. Jesus Christ found me on the day everyone else abandoned me. And perhaps you are listening to me now and feeling something you can't explain. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's longing for God. Maybe it's that peace you've never experienced, but recognize as truth. I want to tell you, don't ignore it. That's how it started for me. A whisper, a touch, a certainty that didn't come from my own strength. God speaks like this. If this testimony touched you, I want to ask you a favor. Not for myself, but because it reaches lives that are in the desert just as I was. Subscribe to this channel right now. Leave your like so that this message may reach those whom God is preparing. And if you stayed until the end, I want to meet you. Comment below. I love Jesus. This is our code of faith today. And before I say goodbye, look at the screen. The next testimony is already appearing. You are about to hear the unbelievable story of a direct descendant of Muhammad who met Jesus after watching a Charlie Kirk debate. It's a journey as intense as mine, and I believe it will speak deeply to your heart. Click and stay with me. See you in the next chapter of God's grace.